Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the Flu Back to Basics webinar. We'll give it another minute or so to ensure that everyone's had a chance to join. Thank you for joining. Thank you for starting the chat off, Mary. Yes, if everyone could put in the chat where they're calling in from, that would be great. And welcome from the West Coast. From Virginia, okay. North Carolina, Pittsburgh, this is awesome. Michigan, Arizona. Awesome, okay. Well, thank you. And again, welcome to the iREACH sponsored webinar with AIM on Flu Back to Basics. And today we hope to present you with an overview of both flu disease and flu vaccines. This is kind of our Flu 101. It'd be a refresher for some, and then for those who may be new to the immunization world, this will be your opportunity to learn more about the nuances of flu disease and flu vaccines. And we welcome all questions during the presentation. You may place your questions in the chat. We'll try to respond to them in real time. And we'll also have dedicated time at the end of the session for a more formal Q&A session as well. We also wanted to just kind of share who we are. I'm a pediatrician with over 20 years of experience in both private practice and urgent care. And I've worked at the CDC in the Immunization Services Division for several years, training healthcare providers across the country on vaccine recommendation. Also led the ACIP work group on the childhood immunization schedule during that time. I currently serve as a public health consultant and subject matter expert to AIM and other national organizations. But our first presenter for today is Dr. Shelley Fiscus, and I'm happy to turn this over to her now. She'll introduce herself as well. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Yabo. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Shelley Fiscus. I am also a pediatrician like Dr. Yabo. I spent about 20 years in private practice in a suburb of Nashville, and now work as a consultant for AIM and for other organizations, largely working around immunization policy. And I'm excited to be with you today, and I'm going to take you through just the beginning of a little bit of a flu refresher. As Dr. Yabo said, for some of you, it'll be a refresher, although there's always new things to learn. So Addie, you'll take that first slide, please. So seasonal influenza virus, which is what we're actually already seeing in the United States, is caused by a virus. It's not a bacteria, but it's a virus. And generally we find, excuse me, two main families of flu viruses in humans, flu A and flu B. But we can also see flus in pigs and birds and dogs and horses and whales and seals and probably other creatures that we don't even know about. And that's where we get avian flus and swine flus and the like. So, but we're going to be focusing on the seasonal human influenza virus, flu A and flu B. Classically, influenza hits you like a truck. People will come into our offices and say, at 2 o'clock yesterday, I got horrible body aches and a fever and a cough and congestion, and I felt like I get hit by a truck, and that is flu. Sometimes there's vomiting and diarrhea with flu, but not usually. Flu is a respiratory infection. Go ahead to the next, please. Oops. There you go. So just some things to go over about flu and lots of myths around flu. So people will say, well, the only time I ever got the flu shot, I got the flu. And the fact is that the flu shot did not make you sick, nor did it make you more susceptible to the flu. It's kind of like saying shark attacks go up when ice cream sales go up. The two things happen because they happen, not because they're necessarily related. People will say they have stomach flu, which is really a misnomer. So stomach viruses are caused by other kinds of viruses. But when we talk about a virus that causes vomiting and diarrhea, that is not influenza. That's going to be some other kind of virus, an enterovirus, maybe that causes that. But flu is a respiratory virus. There might be vomiting and diarrhea along with the respiratory symptoms, but there are always respiratory symptoms. There's always cough, congestion, and usually there's fever. Some people will say, I don't need the shot because I never get the flu. The fact is, we get vaccinated against lots of things that we don't get. Like polio, which hopefully we will continue to not get, or measles or diphtheria. Flu is actually a real annual threat that all of us are exposed to every year. And the best way to prevent getting flu is to get the flu vaccine. Some people have been told that they can't get a flu vaccine because they're allergic to eggs. And that used to be the recommendation. Or sometimes that you go to an allergist office to get your flu vaccine if you're allergic to flu. To eggs. That is no longer the case. So even flu vaccines that are made using eggs, which we'll get into in a little bit, are okay for people who are allergic to eggs. They should just make sure that they get their flu vaccine in a place where someone could respond to an emergency, like a doctor's office or in a clinic setting, not like through a drive-through flu vaccination kind of setup. And then some people think they need steroids and a Z-Pak. Unfortunately, we see overprescribing of both of those medications. Z-Pak, which is an antibiotic, is not necessary unless someone knows that you have a bacterial pneumonia, because viruses don't respond to antibiotics. So there's no reason to take antibiotics when you have the flu. And we don't need steroids, which are really difficult for our bodies to deal with in most cases, unless you're an asthmatic, where your doctor is saying you've got such terrible lung inflammation, you need steroids. So don't go in thinking that those are things that you need unless you've got some kind of medical history of chronic conditions like asthma. Likely you won't need either of those prescriptions. Go to the next, please. So I was talking to you right at the start about flu A and flu B. So usually we'll see influenza A viruses at the beginning of the season, and then sometimes we'll see the influenza B viruses come a little bit later. This is what we've been seeing for the flu viruses over the last year. So the first line that I have there is January of 2022, and the last line is September of 2022. And so you can see where the flu season hit in February, March of 2022. And then we've kind of had this summer low, and it's almost all been influenza A over the last year. So the influenza A is the yellow bars, the influenza B is the green bars, which is tiny little slivers at the top. So we have not seen a lot of flu B virus circulating over the last year or so. I will draw your attention to where the 922 arrow is though, and you can see that black line is showing that we're starting to have an uptick in cases already, which is quite early for influenza. Usually we're not going to see a big onset of cases until maybe early November, but we are already seeing cases of influenza across the United States now. So we're bracing ourselves for an early flu season. Next, please. We can sometimes look to the Southern Hemisphere for what to expect from influenza. So this is what's happened in Australia. Our summer is their winter time. So the red line is their 2022 influenza season. And then the dotted lines are prior seasons. And you can see that the 2022 season came a lot earlier than what traditionally happens with influenza in Australia too. So it's not surprising that we're beginning to see influenza a couple of months early in the United States as well. I'll also draw your attention to that yellow line. That is the 5-year average of cases. So you can see that 2022 was well in excess of what the average was for cases of influenza over the last 5 years. Comparable years were 2017, which was probably the worst flu season that we've had in recent past. And then 2019, that season early on in the pandemic, where we had a kind of a rough year before everything sort of dropped off because we were all wearing masks and staying away from each other. So, so Australia did not have a good season this past year, and that does worry us a little bit for what's to come for the United States. Next, please. So cases, and you can hit the next one too. So when we look at surveillance for pneumonia, flu, and COVID-19 deaths from the National Center for Health Statistics mortality surveillance system, again, the red line here is the percent of deaths that are due to pneumonia, influenza, or COVID-19 compared to the number of COVID deaths, which are in the blue, and the number of flu deaths, which are in the yellow. And you can see that, the overwhelming majority of deaths related to pneumonia, influenza, or COVID were related to COVID over the past year or so. The black line is the epidemic thresholds. This is where we start to get concerned. That we're seeing a lot of cases, and you can see that the last couple of years, the flu cases haven't even reached that epidemic threshold because, again, we've been doing a lot of COVID mitigation strategies, but the COVID death cases have been significantly higher than the epidemic threshold. So we don't want to forget about COVID as we come into this next flu season. Next, please. This is the outpatient visits for respiratory illnesses that's reported to the flu surveillance network that all of the states collect samples from patients over the course of the season to see what's happening. So the 2021-2022 season, you can see respiratory illnesses have kind of been plodding along compared to what we have seen historically over 2019, and which is the green line, and the kind of the pale line is pale blue line is the 2017-2018 season, which again was a rough season. So we've been significantly under where we would expect cases to be for respiratory illnesses as we've come through 2021 and into 2022. But again, bracing ourselves for what's coming up. Next, please. So this is what the US map looks like for influenza specifically, or influenza-like illness specifically. So just a couple of weeks ago, this entire map was dark green. And then we saw a moderate number of influenza-like cases in Texas, in New Mexico, which is the yellow to the left of Texas, and in South Carolina. And then over the next week and a half or so, we've started to see this movement across the United States from that dark green coming into light green, which signifies that we're seeing some low cases and maybe even starting to get towards moderate in some areas. We're also seeing moderate cases in the District of Columbia right now. So this is, again, unusually early activity for influenza, which means that we need to think about protecting ourselves earlier than we might otherwise recommend. Next, please. So as I mentioned, the best way to prevent getting influenza is to get a flu vaccine, and also to do all the things that we've been doing for COVID-19 for the past 3 years: washing our hands, avoiding crowds, staying home if we're sick, wearing a mask out in public to protect ourselves from not only COVID, but also influenza, and to be working to make sure that if we are in places with large numbers of people, that there's good ventilation for that. Next, please. So everyone is recommended to get an influenza vaccine every year, beginning at 6 months of age. And this is one of those vaccines, kind of like the COVID-19 vaccines, where flu is really good at changing itself. That flu virus changes over the course of the year, sometimes over just courses of months, sometimes even within an influenza season. We will see mutations in the influenza virus, so that the virus that we see at the beginning of the season might not exactly look like the virus that we have in the middle or the end of the season. And that's why we have to get these annual vaccines. They've been working on trying to get a universal flu vaccine for a really long time and just haven't been able to quite get that yet. So we get what are called quadrivalent vaccines. That means there's 4 strains of flu viruses in the vaccine. So 2 A strains and 2 B strains. So like we're seeing with COVID-19, we started out with just one type of COVID-19 virus. With the first vaccine, now we have this new bivalent booster that has 2 different ones, the original strain and now the Omicron strain. So it's a bivalent vaccine. That means 2. The flu vaccines are quadrivalent, which means 4. So we get 2 A's and 2 B's, and that tells our body what to expect those viruses to look like, so it can prime the immune system and be ready to fight that virus if our body sees it. There are 2 different types of doses of the vaccine. One is a standard dose, which is for people who are 6 months to age 64. And then there's a high dose that is now recommended for 65 and older, that just gives a little extra dose of flu vaccine plus something called an adjuvant that helps it work a little bit better, because we know that as immune systems begin to age, they don't mount as much of a response to a vaccine as they do when they're younger. There are a whole bunch of different manufacturers for flu vaccines. So there's Afluria, Fluvarix, Flulaval, Fluzone, Flucelvax. It doesn't really matter which one you get. Flu mist is the only one that you can get in your nose. So if you'd rather not get a shot and would rather just get a little nose spray, that is for ages 2 to age 45. Or 49, sorry. The other shots are for people ages 6 months and older, to any age. And what we have seen historically is that Black children and adults have the lowest flu vaccination rates and the highest hospitalizations for influenza-related illnesses. So this is another area of immunizations where we see significant disparities that we're trying to address. Next, please. So how do those vaccines work? Well, if you've been part of our COVID-19 Hot Topics lectures, we've been through some of these little animations that show you how they work. So they actually start with eggs for most of these vaccines, and they take the flu virus and they put it into eggs, and inside the eggs, it makes lots and lots of copies of itself. And so then they're able to take that virus out of the eggs and wash it. And they do some things to it to make sure that it can't infect anyone. So that's a killed virus vaccine, which is what all of these are, except for the flu mist, the one that goes in your nose. And then they take that killed virus and they put it into a vaccine that they then give us into our deltoid muscle in our arm. So our body looks and sees, oh, there's something here foreign that doesn't belong in our body. And it sends in these little, here denoted as little pink cells, immune cells, that say, oh, this isn't supposed to be here. I need to get rid of this. And so the body's immune system makes antibodies, which are what these little Ys are. And so those antibodies go and clamp on to the flu virus particles that are in the vaccine, and they alert the immune system that these little packages are not supposed to be in the body. So our immune system cells come out like soldiers, and they get rid of the vaccine that's been put in our arm. And in the process, they create this memory that tells them that, oh, okay, if I ever see this virus looking thing again, I'm going to go attack it and get rid of it. So when we get infected with influenza virus, which you can see here at the little green particles, though our immune system immediately says, oh, I've seen this before, I need to get rid of this. It sends our antibodies in to attach to that virus. Then it sends in our little soldier cells to get rid of that virus. And then we get rid of it before the flu virus is able to use our cells to make copies of itself and really make us sick. So it's important that we continue to remind our immune system every year of what the influenza virus looks like by giving it a vaccine so that it can get our immune system ready to be able to attack it before we can get really sick from the virus and before we can spread it onto other people. Next, please. So when we look at influenza vaccines and we look at how well these vaccines work, you'll always hear in the news, oh, the flu vaccine was or wasn't a good match. And the media loves to kind of glom onto that. Oh, the flu vaccine wasn't a good match this year. And what they mean by that is that they have to anticipate which strains of flu virus are going to come and try to infect us this year. But they had to do it a long time ago, months and months ago, so that they have time to go through that whole egg process and make the vaccines. So it's a little bit of an educated guessing game to try to figure out which strains need to be put into the vaccine to hopefully protect us from the flu that's going to come around this season. So last year, overall, the flu vaccines worked about a third of the time to prevent illness against influenza A, which was an H3N2 strain. And they prevented the need for medical care from influenza by about a third of the time. So getting a flu vaccine, even if you might get the flu, significantly decreases your chance of needing to go to the doctor because you're sick and of needing to be hospitalized or potentially dying from influenza. And people who have comorbidities like asthma, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, obesity, or who are very old or very young are at higher risk of getting influenza and being hospitalized or dying from influenza every year. So I will take those odds to say that I've got probably a 2/3 chance of either not getting influenza at all or not needing a doctor if I do get influenza. Those are pretty good odds to justify getting the vaccine. Next, please. So what we usually say, especially as pediatricians, is that you should get your flu vaccine before Boo or before Halloween. So flu before Boo. This year, as I said, it's looking like things are going to come early. And so it wouldn't be a bad idea to go ahead and get a vaccine even in September, anticipating that we're going to see flu earlier than what we usually would. And if you're in Texas or New Mexico or South Carolina, you already have a pretty good amount of influenza burden in those states already. So you might want to consider going out and getting a vaccine now. I actually got mine last weekend with my COVID bivalent booster. And so I feel pretty good about being protected against both of those right now. So, but definitely you want to get immunized against influenza every year before Halloween to make sure that you've got that immunity ready to go to protect you from the season. And I think, oh, one more. Okay, so treatment. So if you should get influenza, there are treatments available. There are several medications, all of which have terrible to pronounce names. But the one that you might have heard of most is Tamiflu. That is an antiviral medication. It's not an antibiotic, but it's a medicine that works against the virus. And any age can take that to get over flu a little bit faster. Or if it's someone who's at high risk and they know that they've had a close exposure to flu, they can take it prophylactically. So they can take it before they get sick to hopefully prevent them from getting sick. So if you have diabetes, cancer, on chemotherapy, you're over the age of 65, you have significant heart disease, and you know that you've been exposed to flu, it's worth a call to your doctor to let them know that you've been exposed, as they might be able to prescribe Tamiflu for you and help you prevent getting sick to begin with. So you don't necessarily have to fall ill to the flu, even if you've been exposed. Hopefully, you've also had your shot. There are a couple of other medications that are available. One is the brand name Relenza, which is an inhaled medication. And then there's Zofluza, which is another oral medication that has just been approved down to age 5. And then Rapivab, which is only by IV for people who are maybe at very high risk or who are hospitalized from influenza. So people who are at high risk should be treated right away. Same as we say for COVID-19. If you are sick and you know that you have COVID-19 or you know you have influenza and you are pregnant, you are very young or over the age of 65, or you have a significant chronic health condition, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, obesity, any of those things that put you at high risk for COVID-19 outcomes or influenza, you should go ahead and get treated, either because you know you've been exposed or because you've begun to feel ill. And don't wait to see how serious things get before you elect to get treated. You go ahead and get treated and prevent yourself from getting really sick or maybe even being hospitalized. Next, please. And I think that takes us to Dr. Yabo.
Thank you, Dr. Shelley. Thank you for such a very comprehensive overview of flu disease and the vaccines. And we encourage you, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll try to address them as we go along. So we also wanted to just kind of delve further into some of the questions or concerns that you may hear often in your families. I know I hear them from my family, in your communities, some of the myths and frequently asked questions. So we'll start with a few of those. The first one we hear often is, you can move to the next slide, please, Addie. Healthy people don't get the flu. And we know that is not true, or they don't get very sick from the flu. That is not true. Healthy people can also get very sick from the flu, potentially die from the flu. Dr. Shelley mentioned the high-risk conditions that we need to be aware of that put people at increased risk for the flu, such as asthma or diabetes, things of that nature. Because what happens there, as she mentioned, is that it worsens your underlying medical condition. And so now you have the flu plus that condition is unstable, could land you in the hospital, but healthy people as well can get very sick. And so we wanted to share one of these videos with you from Latasha. Thank you for sharing that, Addie. So that was Latasha's story. Luckily, she made it through, but I know many of you either know someone or have heard of someone who really got very sick or unfortunately died from the flu. So that's one of the myths we wanted to dispel today. Another one is flu vaccine. You know, you don't need a flu vaccine every year. You don't need a flu shot every year. And Dr. Shelley touched on this a little bit, and so I'll expand. A flu vaccine is needed every year. Why? For several reasons. Your protection from that one flu shot you get this year will typically last 6, maybe sometimes 7, 8 months. It doesn't carry over for a whole year. And so your protection wanes. That antibody that you develop, or those antibodies you develop to fight the flu virus, they start to kind of slow down. That's why we need boosters. So getting a flu shot every year is like getting a booster every year. Flu viruses can also change every year. And so the strains in there, like we mentioned earlier, for example, now that we have the Omicron, we can do a better comparison. We have Omicron 4 and 5 and the initial Omicron and the initial COVID strain. We had to make an updated booster vaccine in order to protect against this new strain. Same thing with the flu vaccines. Every year, the viruses that are found to be circulating around the world may change. And as a result, we have to have a vaccine that will match those viruses as close as possible to match as we can get. And so that's why a flu vaccine composition may change every year. And so if you have the flu vaccine from the prior season, one is wane, and secondly, it may not protect you against the current strains. So for the very best protection, it's important that everyone 6 months and older get vaccinated annually with the flu shot for that particular season. So if you go now to get your flu vaccine, it should be the one for the 2022 to 2023 season. So something else we hear is about pregnant women or pregnant people, and is the flu vaccine safe? Will it actually provide protection during pregnancy? And we find that yes, it actually helps protect pregnant people during and after pregnancy. Pregnancy is a very difficult period during which time you're carrying another human. So your workload, the work that your body has to do to stay healthy, is kind of doubled. So you're already at a not necessarily immunocompromised state, but you're working harder than you should normally. So if you come down with something like COVID or the flu, it really can cause a lot of havoc on your body, cause you to perhaps be in the hospital from complications from the flu because of the pregnancy overload. And then also it can really affect you even after pregnancy. So what we find is that flu vaccine cuts the risk of those illnesses by about a half in pregnant people. So just by having the flu vaccine, you're really trying to cut that risk down of someone who gets the flu while they're pregnant becoming very ill. It reduces their risk of hospitalization. And what we love also is that you're protecting two people. You're protecting the pregnant person. You're also protecting the baby. What we've found through studies is that the pregnant person is able to pass antibodies or those protective cells after getting the flu vaccine onto their newborn as well. And those protective antibodies can last for several months after birth, which is very important because, as we mentioned earlier, you're not eligible to get a flu vaccine until you're 6 months or older. So that means for those first 6 months of life, the baby needs to be protected from the womb by the parent being vaccinated, and also by those around them. This is what we call cocooning. It's so important that everyone who's going to be around a newborn during the flu season has their flu vaccine so that they're not spreading flu to that young infant before they're old enough to be vaccinated. We also hear, well, if you feel well, that means I'm okay, I'm not spreading the flu. But we found out a lot this year from COVID-19, which is very similar in many ways to the flu, that you can pass it on even if you have no symptoms. Some people can be infected with the flu virus but have no symptoms. During that time, you can still spread the virus to others. That's what's called the asymptomatic spread. And your symptoms from the flu can begin about 2 days after the virus enters your body. That means that even though you're not having symptoms for those initial 2 days, you can pass on the flu to someone else before you even know you're sick, as well as while you're sick. So it's very important, again, to protect yourself and those around you. Get the flu vaccine. During this season, we continue to encourage masking when you're in indoor and crowded situations, so that you are doing everything in your venue to make sure that you're not passing on flu or COVID to someone else who may not be able to bear it as well as you could. And then if you go back one for a second, you can catch the flu from going out in cold weather. I know this is something my mom, my aunties will always say, you know, wear that hat, or don't go out with your hair wet. Don't sit near the drafty window after you just wash your hair. You're going to get sick. You're going to get a cold. As Dr. Shelley mentioned, often people believe that you can just kind of catch the flu or cold in that way, but these are really viruses. These are germs that you catch from someone else who has sneezed, either unfortunately close to you or on a surface. You come behind them, touch that surface or object, and that's how these illnesses spread. So we can look at some of the information here. So this again is just sharing with you that flu is called by that a germ, a virus. And this is a video that explains a little bit more about how you can get sick from the flu.
Flu is a contagious respiratory illness caused by influenza viruses. When people with flu cough or sneeze, you can inhale droplets that contain flu viruses. The viruses infect your cells and make copies of themselves. Flu virus infection triggers inflammation in your body, which produces flu symptoms. Severe inflammation can cause lung damage and other serious problems. Your body's immune system responds by sending proteins called antibodies to fight the infection. Some people experience serious flu complications that can lead to hospitalization and even death. Flu vaccines have been shown to reduce the risk of catching flu and may lessen the severity of symptoms. Everyone 6 months and older needs flu vaccine each year. Join the fight against flu. Learn more at cdc.gov/fightflu.
Thanks for sharing that, Addie. So, just another point from that video. I picked up something else each time I watch it, but I thought it was a great video. But it also sharing the importance of knowing that vaccinations are not 100% protective or effective. Yes, there will be some people who will still get the flu even though they've had their flu vaccine. And that's okay, but they're less likely, just like with COVID vaccine, they're less likely to be hospitalized or die from the flu because they have that armor of protection because they got vaccinated. So it's so important to encourage those in your communities. As Dr. Shelley showed, African-American children and adults for years now have had long-standing disparities as far as vaccination rates, flu vaccination rates, as compared to other races and ethnicities. And this has been for years. So we've done so much great work over the last couple of years with COVID-19 and decreasing those gaps. This is the year for us to really try to do the same with the flu vaccine. What can we do to really decrease those disparities? Find out from your communities why you're not getting the flu vaccine this year, or why have you not received it in the past? Having those one-on-one conversations that have worked very well with increasing COVID-19 vaccination rates. So I'll stop there and now send over to our other colleague, Lisa Jacques Carl, who will introduce herself. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Dr. Yabo and Dr. Shelley. My name is Lisa Jacques Carroll. I'm the other immunization subject matter expert supporting the iREACH project. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time showing you some resources that you might find helpful this fall when you're messaging with your community about flu vaccination. So if you can go to the first one, please, Addie. Thanks. So we're still waiting on CDC's digital media toolkit. They have not yet released the new campaign materials for the 2022-2023 flu season. But if you go to this website on the side, you will see the resources that they have from last year. So there's lots of graphics that you can use on social media, fact sheets, videos like the one that Dr. Yabo just showed, public service announcements, and more. And so hopefully they'll also be releasing new materials soon, and we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll send a message out or share on Hot Topics in future weeks once that new toolkit is available. But there's still plenty of material on the CDC website that you can take a look at. And then the next slide, please. So Vaccinate Your Family is another organization that has lots of great materials that you can find information like social media graphics, like the ones that I've shown here, and also the personal stories and videos. And they have their materials in both English and Spanish. So they're another great resource for you. And then Families Fighting Flu, the name of the organization says it all. They're solely focused on influenza. They have, again, lots of graphics, videos, stories, and the video that was shared previously was one of those from Families Fighting Flu, and they have some really great resources. So check their website out as well. And then the next organization, actually, I wanted to just highlight Spanish, specifically Spanish language resources. So if you can click one more, Addie. I just pulled up the various sites that have specifically Spanish materials. So CDC, Families Fighting Flu, and then the No Time for Flu campaign. National Minority Quality Forum's Health Champions website has Spanish language resources, and then Rally social media resources are really great. If you can click forward, Addie, these are just some examples. The one on the top is actually an infographic that we developed for iREACH on talking about differences between the flu and a common cold. And we have that available, I think, on the iREACH website. And then the one on the left is from CDC, and I believe the one on the right is from No Time for Flu. And then if you can click again, thank you. And these are just some more examples of Spanish language resources that you can find at these websites. And then the next one is the National Minority Quality Forum. And if you can click forward once more, they have a library of different social media graphics that you can look at. And some of theirs are flu and COVID messaging, and some just talk about flu. And again, there's a lot of Spanish resources here. And then the next thing they have are infographics. And again, some of them are talking about both flu and COVID, and some of them are specific to flu. And then the next campaign is this No Time for Flu. And this is a joint effort with the Ad Council, AMA, and CDC. And there's lots of really nice looking graphics, PSAs, print materials, banners, lots of really high quality resources on the Get My Flu Shot Ad Council website. So definitely take a look at that as well. And I believe that is our last slide. And now we're going to move into the question and answer period. So we're happy to take questions either via the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question live, that would also be great. And thanks for your attention.
While we're waiting for people to ask questions, I'll just share too that if you remember back to the H1N1 pandemic in 2009, is that right? 2009, yeah. Dr. Yabo's nodding. That was a virus that particularly hit kids very hard. Lots of children got sick. I actually lost a child in my practice to an influenza B virus about 7 years ago. A completely healthy 8-year-old child who got infected with influenza B, and it attacked her heart, similar to the story that you heard previously. And she unfortunately did not survive that. And there was also a 5-year-old in my community who died from an influenza A virus. Almost always when children die from influenza, it is children who are not vaccinated. One thing that we didn't bring up is that children who are under the age of 9 actually need to get 2 doses of influenza vaccine in their very first season of getting vaccinated. So if you have a 6-month-old, they need to get a shot at 6 months, then they go back a month later and get another shot. Or if it's a 3-year-old who's never had a flu vaccine before, they would go and get 1, and then a month later get a second shot. And then every year after that, they just get the 1. But the very first time they need to get 2. And that second one serves kind of like a booster, like we do with COVID, where the first one lets the immune system know that this is a potential problem with this virus. And the second one kind of reinforces that message and really builds the stronger and longer lasting immunity. So if you are working with children or parents of young children, it's possible that their child may need to get 2 doses of vaccine this year, and they want to plan ahead to make sure that those children are fully vaccinated, hopefully before the end of October, which means getting 1 now, so that they can get their second one in October and be fully protected for the season. So what questions do you all have? You can, as Lisa said, you can put them in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute and just ask if you'd like.
Looks like Anna has her hand up. Go ahead, Anna.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again. Fantastic content to cull from. Thank you so much. I don't know if I missed this. I'm looking for the 2022 vaccine information statement. It's that double-sided sort of fact sheet. And at least when I did some research last week, I didn't come up with the 2022 version. I'm wondering if you know if it's been released.
We'll take a look and see. It should be because they're new strains, and some years they have not done a new one because it was the same strains in the vaccine, but this year, because 2 strains were changed, it could be. So we'll double check and let you know. We'll put it in the
Thank
chat.
you. I appreciate that. And if you, and in Spanish as well, that would be great.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So I see a question, what is the likelihood of long flu with this variant? So, that's a term that's been used for COVID, long COVID, meaning people who have symptoms lasting several months after their COVID infection. We have not seen that term used with flu. What we do see is that with any flu virus, any of the strains, you can have complications from the flu. So unfortunately, in addition to being hospitalized or ending up in the ICU, you could have heart complications or pneumonia, things that can last for a longer time than anticipated because you basically got sicker from the flu. So like I said, we haven't seen that terminology used, but yes, you can definitely have complications from the flu. Thanks, Lisa, for sharing that current flu BIS.
And just to note that the date of the current VIS is still 2021. So I think probably they didn't have updates to the VISs. So that is the current date right now. For the intranasal, it's August 6, 2021. And for the inactivated flu, the current VIS is the same date, August 6 of 2021.
And you can still use it. If you're vaccinated now with your clinics, you can still use that.
Right.
It's a question about resources for individuals who are uninsured or underinsured and would like to get a free flu shot. So let's see what Vaccine Finder shows. Hold on one second.
And frequently the best place for someone who's uninsured or underinsured to get a flu vaccine is going to be at a local health department or potentially at a federally qualified health clinic or community health center. But as Dr. Yabo said, the vaccinefinder.org site is listing both COVID and influenza vaccines now. So you can also refer them to that site.
And I'm also going to share the HRSA Health Center Finder link, which will help you find a, like Dr. Shelley said, an FQHC or a rural health center.
So Laura asked, I've heard that the flu is disappearing since COVID. I see the statistics say otherwise. Do you think there have been more or less cases since COVID? So the virus has definitely been circulating, but there were fewer cases during COVID, probably for a couple of different reasons. One is that people were being very careful with masking and staying home if they were sick, and we were taking a lot more protective measures about COVID that translated to flu. Now you can argue that maybe we should have been doing that for influenza all the time, and there are countries that do routinely mask during the influenza season. It's just not something that has been routinely done in America prior to COVID. But the virus was still there. Now, viruses do compete with each other to an extent as well. So sometimes when there's a massively circulating virus, then you'll see less circulating viruses of other types. So both of those things working together probably kept the cases down for the last couple of years, both the masking, staying away from people, staying home when you're sick part, and also the the competition between the viruses that may have impacted that a little bit too. It's looking like we're not going to be as lucky this season, at least if we're looking by what happened in Australia, because people are largely back to pre-COVID lives. They're not wearing masks in public. They're not being as careful about gathering in groups, maybe not as likely to stay home if they're not feeling well, or if they're not feeling well and they test themselves for COVID, might go out into the community. There aren't home tests for influenza. So it's important that we're still doing all of those things to try to keep each other safe and to keep those cases down. Thankfully, right now, COVID is continuing to decrease across the United States, although we're still seeing 300 to 400 deaths a day in the United States, which is not a number that any of us should get comfortable with. But hopefully we're not going to see a big surge of COVID at the same time that we see peaks in the flu season, but we'll see how things go. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. The last call for questions. You can either raise your hand, unmute, or drop something in the chat.
Thank you all for attending. Always good to have active listeners, and we appreciate the questions we did receive. And we're very happy to follow up with any questions you think of later, and you can send those to the iREACH email. And Addie, if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat, that'd be great. Thank you. And thank you, Addie, for moving our slides today and for coordinating and organizing. We really appreciate you. Anything you wanted to add, Addie or Trevor? I see you put a note in about the recording. I think they're just saying there'll be a copy of the presentation along with the recording later this week. So if you registered for the webinar, you should receive something saying that you'll get a copy as well as the recording.
Yeah, thank you all for your attention. We appreciate you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Jeremy.